Okay, as promised, we're going to take a little bit of a closer look or a longer look at the Federalist Papers and the executive. As I stated earlier, probably the most important, or if not the most important, one of the most important uh, sections of the Federalist Papers, because of the fact that the executive, they needed a strong executive. There were a lot of problems with the Articles of Confederation. So the main one being not having a strong executive. So as I mentioned before, so that they could pay for debts, collect taxes, wage war, uh, engage in commerce nationally, internationally, and so forth, right? So I want to show, read through, if not all of it, a good portion of Federalist paper essay number 67, and kind of get a feel. We were just looking at the summaries and analysis of the essays, because reading through each essay would just be way too much time, way too time consuming. But I wanted, as a writer myself and as a teacher, as a English professor, I want you to get a feel for the language. This is back in a time when there wasn't a lot to distract one. There wasn't a lot on the radio. There was no radio. On the television, no television. There wasn't a lot on the internet. No internet. So what they had to do was read. Reading was very popular. Excuse me. Reading was very popular, especially amongst those of statehood, those politicians and so forth who were looking to run and guide the country politically. And, you know, Hamilton, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, a lot of what they spent their time doing was reading. They took their responsibilities seriously as statesmen, and they took the responsibility of forming this new country, this new democratic experiment. They took it seriously. So I just want to read through this, and keep in mind that a lot of these essays here, it says from the New York Packet, I guess that's a newspaper. A lot of these essays appeared in the local newspapers. Okay. So this is to the people of New York State, from Alexander Hamilton. The Constitution of the Executive Department of the proposed government claims next our attention. There's hardly any part of the system which could have been attended with greater difficulty in the arrangement of than this. There it is, right? And there is perhaps none which has been in vain against with less candor, or criticized with less judgment. So there's going to be a lot of vocabulary in here. I suggest you going through this, or maybe several, if you want to enhance your vocabulary, several of your essays. And if you want, you can just, if you look how easy it is to look up words, right? Okay, so don't be lazy. All right. None which has been in vain against hostile, right? Against with less candor. Candor is to be honest, right? Quality of being honest and telling the truth. I'll do a couple for you then. Or criticized with less judgment. Judgment there is not necessarily in the negative, but in the neutral, right? Was it judged properly, judiciously, honestly, ethically? I'll be okay. Right. So let's just read through that again. It's very important. There is hardly any part of the system which could have been attended with greater difficulty in the arrangement of than this. And I'll speak to that in a minute. And there is perhaps none which has been in vain against with less candor, honesty, just attacked or criticized with less judgment. And I think there he means honest judgment, good judgment. So why was it difficult? Well, as I said before, when we looked at the House and the Senate, there wasn't much to discuss when we got to the analysis part or sections of those essays. It mentioned there's not much to say, not much to analyze, because this is just kind of straightforward, descriptive look at the House and the Senate. All right. But the executive department, the need for a strong executive, right? Bit of a difference because of the fact that it probably it did need the most work, right? So anyways, but let's go through. You'll see, and if you think Hamilton has a killer vocabulary and way with words, this is not introductory reading, intermediate, maybe advanced reading, if you're looking at levels intermediate to advanced, depending on where you are. But Hamilton, quite a vocabulary, especially for a military man, right? You would think, these military people, they're probably not too educated. Nothing could be further from the truth, right? Even Washington, not a great intellectual or that well spoken, but still, if you heard him speak, you would say, he has some abilities. He's an elocutionist. No, not quite, but definitely was a good thinker and good speaker, obviously, right? If he led the country. Here, the writers against the Constitution seem to have taken, and what I'll do is, instead of going over every sentence and defining every vocabulary word that may be out of your range, I'll just kind of give you a synopsis, paragraph by paragraph, more or less, okay? Here, the writers against the Constitution seem to have taken pains to signalize, there's a word for it, their talent of misrepresentation, calculating upon the aversion of the people to monarchy, right? Remember that they were coming from monarchy. They were coming from despots. They were coming from single-handed rulers who would just dictate to his inferiors, his seconds and thirds, and pass it on down the line, what to do. Like King George III, I'll tell you everything that is to be done. I am the source. I might not even need advisors. I may not even speak to anyone. So there were potentates or dictators of such an ilk who existed back then, still to this day. Mussolini was probably one. Anyways, calculating upon the aversion of the people to monarchy, they have endeavored to enlist all their jealousies and apprehensions. I love the turn of the phrase. Sorry, you're talking to a word guy here. I was reading books up in trees when I was like 11, 12 years old, right? In opposition to the intended president of the United States, not merely as the embryo, but as the full-grown progeny, you know these words, of that detested parent. That's great, isn't it? To establish the pretended affinity, they have not scrupled to draw resources even from regions of fiction. Great vocabulary, great turn of a phrase. This is good stuff. You're annoyed, I can tell. You don't care. The authorities of a magistrate, what's a magistrate? In few instances greater, in some instances less than those of the governor of New York, have been magnified into more than royal prerogatives. He has been decorated with attributes superior in dignity and splendor to those of the King of Britain. So we're equating the governor of New York with a king, right? And keep in mind that the governors were appointed. They were not elected. The governors were appointed for a time until sometime after the Constitution. Were appointed, and this was one of the grievances in the Declaration of Independence, were appointed by the king, King George III, right? He has been shown to us with the diadem sparkling on his brow and the imperial purple flowing in his train. Remember, purple has been mentioned several times in here. That is the color of royalty. It's probably also the color of those high-ranking religious figures, especially in the Greek and Roman churches. Purple often signaled royalty or high ranking. Red too, somewhat, but I think purple was the major color. I'm not a color expert, but I think that was the main signaler of royalty, high ranking elites, right? He has been seated on a throne surrounded with minions. You know what a minion is, right? You've seen the movies. And mistresses, giving audience to the envoys of foreign potentates. Don't you love this? What is an envoy? What is a potentate? You can kind of get some of these vocabulary words just from the context, right? Potentates. Doesn't that sound like king or something? I don't know. I'll do this one for you. Let's look it up, right? Monarch or ruler. There you go, right? That's a synonym for ruler, king. And all the supercilious. Oh man, that's great. I love these words. Supercilious pomp of majesty. The images of Asiatic despotism and voluptuousness have scarcely been wanting to crown the exaggerated scene. Damn. Look at that turn of a phrase. The images of Asiatic despotism and voluptuousness have scarcely been wanting to crown the exaggerated scene. Let's look at that again. We have been taught to tremble at the terrific visages of murdering janissaries and to blush at the unveiled mysteries of a future seraglio. Look those words up, right? Attempts so extravagant as these to disfigure, or it might rather be said to metamorphose the object, render it necessary to take an accurate view of its real nature and form, in order as well to ascertain its true aspect and genuine appearance as to unmask the disingenuity and expose the fallacy of the counterfeit resemblance which have been so insidiously as well as industriously propagated. The hell is he talking about there, right? Let's continue. You'll see. It'll come out in the work. In the execution of this task, there is no man who would not find it an arduous effort either to behold with moderation or to treat with seriousness the devices, not less weak than wicked, which have been contrived to pervert the public opinion in relation to the subject, right? So basically, there's some manipulation going on here, right? They so far exceed the usual, though unjustifiable, license of party artifice that even in a disposition the most candid and tolerant, they must force the sentiments which favor an indulgent construction of the conduct of political adversaries to give place to a voluntary and unreserved indignation. It is impossible not to bestow the imputation of deliberate imposture and deception upon the gross pretense of a similitude between the King of Great Britain and a magistrate of the character marked out for that of the President of the United States. It is still more impossible to withhold the imputation from the rash and barefaced expedients which have been employed to give success to the attempted imposition. That is a lot of verbiage. I know it's redundant because verbiage means a lot. But anyways, let's look at that again. They so far exceed the the usual, though unjustifiable, licenses of party artifice. What is artifice, right? There's a lot there, so I'll take some time with the vocabulary here, right? Right. Artifice is kind of, it says here it's clever, ingenuity, but kind of yeah, tricky, false, yeah, insincere. The second part gives it more detail. It is trickiness, but it is artfulness, ingenuity, but kind of done underhanded, in a tricky way, right? That even in a disposition the most candid is, to be straightforward and honest and sincere, right? And tolerant, they must force the sentiments which favor an indulgent construction of the conduct of political adversaries to give place to a voluntary and unreserved indignation. So I am totally indignant about that issue or concern. It is impossible not to bestow the imputation, or to put upon, right, the imputation of deliberate imposture and deception upon the gross pretense of a similitude or similarity between a king of Britain and a magistrate of the character marked out for that of the president of the United States, right? So not a good comparison. Right? Just cut to the chase, right? Basically what it's saying. It's impossible not to bestow the imputation of deliberate imposture. And so it's deception, right? To compare the king of Britain and the character of the president of the United States. It's kind of like calling, like how some call certain politicians Hitler. There is not one president or politician that I know of that I can think of offhand in recent years, mostly. That's my point of reference. I'm not going to go back in history. I'm not a history buff here, but there is really no one that I can think of who was even remotely close to Hitler. One who wants to be a complete dictator and impose genocide on particular groups, one greatly, some lesser so. World domination, and deception and kidnapping and murdering and executing and all that. Nobody, believe me, anybody who has ever run for president has even come remotely close to Hitlerian disposition. Okay, so get that out of your mind. Stop using exaggerated statements that have no place in the realm of accuracy or honesty or candor, right? Kind of, it's like what Hamilton is complaining about here, right? You can't make that comparison. It's ridiculous, to compare the King of Britain to the President of the United States, right? In one instance, which I cite as a sample of general spirit, the temerity has proceeded so far as to ascribe to the President of the United States a power which by the instrument reported as expressly allotted to the executive in individual states. I mean the power of filling casual vacancies in the Senate. Okay. This bold experiment upon the discernment of his countrymen has been hazarded by a writer who, whatever may be his real merit, has had no inconsiderable share in the applause of his party, and who, upon this false and unfounded suggestion, has built a series of observations equally false and unfounded. Let him now be confronted with the evidence of the fact, and let him, if he be able, justify or extenuate the shameful outrage he has offered to the dictates of truth and to the rules of fair dealing. So again, very, very wordy and fancy way of saying this guy is making up stories. He's fabricating, he's misinforming, right? Right. And it, of course, said in a very long-winded, flowery manner. Okay. But again, I just want to give you an example. Now you see why I didn't read through the whole thing. I'm not going to read through these essays one by one. That's way too much of a challenge, and they're not all this difficult to get through. But this one, I picked this one for a reason. This has a high level of difficulty, as you can see, right? And sometimes it's hard to just, as you're going through these relatively sometimes lengthy sentences, it's hard to just, with all the words and the phrasing, it's hard to just keep track of what he's saying. You're trying to build imagery in your mind, right? By the phrases and the words that you're reading, right? That have been written. And it's difficult sometimes to keep a toehold. Okay, I got that, but then you start sliding as you're reading something else. Okay, what was that? Oh, okay, I'm gonna go get that. Okay, now I got that. Okay, I got those two, and now you're reading on. All right, and then you get to a fourth one, you start sliding again. And what was I referring to? And you got to go back to the initial reference point, the subject. So it gets a little crazy. It's difficult, right? And we're not used to this level of language. The second clause of the second section of the second article empowers the President of the United States to nominate and by with the advice and consent of the Senate to appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, which is being done right now by President Trump, right? And all officers of the United States whose appointments are not in the Constitution otherwise provided for and which shall be established by law. Immediately after this clause follows another in these words: the president shall have power to fill up, question mark, vacancies that may happen during the recess of the Senate by granting commissions which shall expire at the end of their next session. It is from this last provision that the pretended power of the president to fill vacancies in the Senate has been deduced. A slight attention to the connection of the clauses and the obvious meaning of the terms will satisfy us that the deduction is not even colorable. But what does that mean? Colorable. Look that word up. Anyways, but if we go back here, the president shall have power to fill up vacancies. I don't know why there's a question mark there. Is that a typo? That may happen during the recess of the Senate, so the Senate's in recess. And you can fill those vacancies. If there's vacancies, and this is back when the president was selecting senators, right? Of course, now it's done by the people, right? Where was he? So have the power, he shall have the power to fill up vacancies that may happen during the recess of the Senate. So when the Senate is in recess and there's some openings, the president can just go, I need three, 1, 2, 3, you three, you've got a job now, right? By granting commissions, money, which shall expire at the end of their next session. Okay. So he's going to hire 3 more, say for example, hire 3 more senators while there's a recess, commission them, pay them, and that pay level, pay grade, will expire at the next session. So senators are voted in every 2 years, right? So you get that pay for 2 years. You get that assignment, well, maybe for 2 years, depending on when their time to be voted in or out comes. Maybe it's in the next 2 years, maybe it's in the next 4 years, maybe it's in the next 6 years, because you remember there's every 2 years there's a vote in the Senate, right? It is from, and I was breaking, because you've got 3 2-year voting periods, right? So that's thirds, right? You got 3/3. So about 33 roughly, maybe 33 get voted in or out, 1 every 2 years, in 2 years, and in 4 years another 33, and then in 2 more years 34, right? For a total of 100. Did I do my math right there? All right, anyway, so this is kind of a lot going on here. You see what I'm saying? The first of these 2 clauses is clear, only proves a mode for appointing such officers whose appointments are not otherwise provided for in the Constitution, which shall be established by law. Of course, it cannot extend to the appointments of senators whose appointments are otherwise provided for in the Constitution and who are established by the Constitution and will not require a future establishment by law. This position will hardly be contested. Okay. Do I want to? Yeah, there's not much more. Let's just do this big honkering paragraph, and then there's a little bit there. Then we'll go back to the summaries, kind of read through them again, and maybe add some more detail over above and beyond of what was given last time. The last of these two clauses is equally clear, cannot be understood to comprehend the power of filling vacancies in the Senate for the following reasons. First, the relation in which the clause stands to the other, which declares the general mode of appointing officers of the United States, denotes it to be nothing more than a supplement to the other for the purpose of establishing an auxiliary method of appointments, right? Auxiliary means an add-on, right? When you've got, like, what do they say? Auxiliary room, I guess. I don't know. The auxiliary is like an add-on. If we go, could be a noun, adjective, noun, auxiliary person, group, or device that provides additional help or support. Add-on in addition to, right? Method of appointment in cases to which the general method was inadequate, the ordinary power of appointment is confirmed to the President and Senate jointly. There you go, right? And can therefore only be exercised during the session of the Senate, but as it would have been improper to oblige this body to be continually in session for the appointment of officers, and vacancies might happen in their recess, which it might be necessary for the public service to fill without delay. The succeeding clause is evidently intended to authorize the president singly, the word singly, I guess that was the old way of saying it, to make temporary appointments during the recess of the Senate by granting commissions, which shall expire at the end of the next session. Secondly, if this clause is to be considered as supplementary to the one which precedes, the vacancies of which it speaks must be construed to relate to the officers described in the preceding one, and this we have seen excludes from its inception the members of the Senate. Thirdly, but I'm not going to redress that. Right? Now we're getting into way over our heads. As I said, I don't want to get into too much of the minutia of the details and the dictating of particulars in regards to the Constitution, laws and the lay of the land, and what in this case, the three bodies do in this case, what the executive does, the particulars of how the executive works and how it moves along, the order of things, I guess you could say, right? So that's that. Just wanted to get in there and kind of get our feet dirty and our vocabulary nasty. So let's take another look at these. We just went over that one, 67, right? I just want to look at the analysis. If it's in there today, yeah. Hamilton was right in observing that no part of the proposed Constitution was being more severely criticized than the broad, strong powers to be exercised by the executive. So this is what I was talking about, right? So that's more modern English. His is just, it can be annoying sometimes. So I understand, if you don't want to read through the text itself, it's a difficult read. It's like Shakespeare. I've read King Lear and something else by Shakespeare. I'm not a fan of having to torture myself in order to, going back to Middle English or Old English, I'm not a fan of torturing myself in order to comprehend what the hell's going on. Never, I was never, even though I'm an English major, I was never into literature. Never cared for it. I'm a writer. That's me. That's why I went and got my bachelor's and master's to write, right? I like reading other things that are more pertinent to our everyday existence, such as what I'm giving you here, Law of the Land, Declaration of Independence. I got to do that one too, right? Declaration of Independence. That's a good one. And maybe, you know what I'll do? I used to do for my students, I know, going off on a tangent. What I used to do for my students was take a look at the Declaration of Independence in conjunction with Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, because there's considerable, and that was an issue with blacks getting their rights. And the fact that blacks at that time, according to the 14th, 15th Amendment, and also the Civil Rights Act and the Voters' Rights Act, well, by 64, 65, they were citizens, especially after, 64, 65 with the Civil Rights Act and the Voters' Rights Act, especially after those documents, right? Or those acts were written and passed and made evidence and obvious to the body politic, to the general populace, right? So Martin Luther King is like, come on, we're all Americans. You got to stop this racism garbage. Not the color of your skin, content of your character, and also the content of the laws for all Americans, right? Anyways, Hamilton was right in observing that no part of the proposed Constitution was being more severely criticized than the broad, strong powers to be exercised by the executive. And again, it was most likely, you see there that the governor of New York, or the governors probably in general, were being compared to, or possibly compared to, there was a possible comparison to the king, the potentate, the magistrate, the dictator, the monarch, right? That was scary stuff. So this kind of hit a raw nerve, executive, president. Isn't that like king? Don't give me no king crap. I don't want no king crap. Don't give this executive too much powers, right? And some of it was not even justified. It was just attacks, as SA 67 is kind of implying. It was just attacks based in emotion, fear, experience, bad experiences, right? Or bad experience, right? More severely criticized than the broad, strong powers to be exercised by the executive, right? So the people were nervous, you can't blame them, right? The popular and fiery Patrick Henry, there's another dude. Maybe I'll start doing these, take a look at some of the very interesting and important people throughout, our early history. And I'll take a look at the women. They don't mention a lot of the women, like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Mother Jones is another one. She's a little, I was going to say older. She's a little past that time, but nevertheless, she was very important in workers' rights, and specifically helping young children, to get out of working, especially working 6-7 days a week, endless, many hours, 10, 12, 15 hours a day. They were throwing kids like 6-7 years old in the workshops, right? And I think she was Irish, Mother Jones. Does that make sense? And I don't know who else is there. There's the Sojourner Truth, a black woman who was really helpful in the Underground Railroad, and she was tough. These women remind me of my wife. She's from Colombia. Don't mess with her. She'll sick the cartel on you. Anyways, popular, fiery Patrick Henry, perhaps the most influential leader of the opposition, spoke for a large number of thoughtful men in saying of the Constitution that, among other deformities, it has an awful squinting. It squints towards monarchy. See? Now, the executive is very important in gaining a strong federal power so that things could be done, so that money could be collected for war debt, so that the country could be protected, and armies called forth and gathered and called forth for national and international trade, for economic, military needs, and all these things, right? They needed a strong executive. But at the same time, strong executive meant executive, kind of like monarchy. We know what those monarchs do. So Patrick Henry was on the opposing party, right? On the opposing party there. And does not this raise indignation in the breast of every true American? There's that phrase, right? True American. Is there a difference between true American and American? Right? In the breast of every American, if you're American, That implies true, but true is just to emphasize. It's unnecessary, but it's there to emphasize. Your president may easily become king. See, where are your checks in this government? Yeah, so they were a little antsy, right? So I hope you're getting the point. The point is getting through. Why this executive portion of the Constitution was not only important, but also controversial, difficult to formulate, difficult to finalize, difficult to not be attacked, right? And that was one of Hamilton's complaints, that, you guys are just attacking this thing for the sake of attacking. You're getting all emotional and scared, you're all scared and emotional. You're not dealing with this calmly and rationally, right? If I can put it in my own terms, instead of all those flowery words that Hamilton's throwing down there. Incidentally, as evidence of widespread monarchical leanings, an organized movement had already proposed that Washington declare himself king. A suggestion that Washington angrily denounced, right? Yeah, so they were probably pro-federalists. They were the Federalists, pro-federalists, right? They wanted the federal to have power. But it was hard. It was hard because you do need a strong executive. You got to give them power, but at the same time, not too much, checks and balances. Keep it under wraps. We don't need, another monarch or dictator. Hamilton failed to mention another major objective of the Constitution. Either here or later, the strong powers of the national government were spelled out at length, but there is not a word about the rights of the states and the liberties. Okay, so this is the Bill of Rights, right? Anti-Federalists took a strong stand that the proposed Constitution should not be adopted until it had been revised to include Bill of Rights. So again, this is a little bit about the nervousness, the nerves of those who are concerned about government, big government, federal government, specifically the king, having too much power, right? It was a possibility that the Philadelphia document, and a lot of people who are so pro-government now, and people say that's just the Democrats, it's not really true. But there are people who are very pro-government, get the government in there, get them to take care of our schools, to take care of our medicines, to take care of our health care, to take care of this and that. And well, get government in there, get them going. Because government greatly, since the American Revolution, has not overstepped its bounds. And that's greatly due to the constitutional law of the land. And also and many judges, federal judges have stated that you can have laws and you can have them on the books, but those laws can be easily ignored. And you can see that around the world, there have been examples of this. Even in the United States, sometimes constitutional law is just ignored. As the executive in the last 15, 20 years has taken on more power and greatly ignored more so the rules. Like, for instance, in regards to big oil is big money. And Biden jumped in and he's, pro-environment, which is good. And he's pro-alternate energy, which is good, especially if it's going to run cleaner. But the problem with alternate energy is you're talking wind and solar and other less prevalent and dependable sources, right? Sadly, electricity, solar power, wind power, all those are nice, but the demands for power by the general population is too much for those alternate sources of energy to supply. And it's a problem. And in California, it's been shown because there have been brownouts and blackouts, because of an attempt to rely more on alternate sources, alternate energy sources. Right? Anyways, that's another issue. It was a possibility that the Philadelphia document might be sent back for revisions that most frightened the Federalists. There you go. They had convinced themselves that adoption of the present draft was a vital necessity. So you got these two groups, right? The Federalists, they're pro-government, they're pro strong executive, and the anti-Federalists are like, Matt, strong executive, nice, but what does that mean? Does that mean you're going to go monarch? You're going to go king on us, right? Anti-Federalists made a strong case and soon won their points. One of the first acts was the Bill of Rights. Okay, so they won out. So don't throw caution to the wind. Caution was embraced, right? Right. Therefore, the Bill of Rights. The amendments were largely drafted and pushed to adoption by Madison, who soon became an anti-Federalist. Oh, joining with Jefferson and putting together varied groups in the first organized opposition, the Republican Democrat Party. Right? Did you know that? Right? I don't know if I really need to. I think I really kind of. Maybe I'll just take a quick look here. Let's take a look at the summary. Oh, electing a president, right? Right. They sense that the people should be operating the choice of the chief executive. True. Accomplished in a special way instead of committing the election of the president of any established body. Choice should be made by men chosen. So this is about the electoral college, right? I should do that too. That seems to I should be jotting down notes. Electoral college. That's a good one. Let me stop. Look at that. I'm taking notes. Electoral college. That's a big one. What did I say? Deck of Independent? Declaration of Independence in conjunction with letter from Birmingham jail. So those are good ones. Those are the ones I think I've talked about before. Good for promises. Put them right on the headphones there. So there's that. Vice president was also to be elected. And there was a problem here. So one of the amendments fixed this. They had like the one that had the most votes, president, second most votes, VP. And we talked about this before. Trump gets the most votes. And now it's different. Voting was done a little bit differently back in the day. Let's say the first time, like Biden gets the most votes, Trump comes in second, so he's the vice president. Do you see a problem with that? Yeah, most people did. And what else we got? The president would be elected for a term 4 years. He'd be eligible for re-election. He would not have the life tenure of an hereditary monarch, right? So this is big. And there was one president who served more than 2 terms, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He served 4 terms, right? I don't think there was another president who served more than 2, if I recall correctly. And I'm not a presidential history expert. That's something to look into, some more interesting reading for me, right? So 4 years, eligible for re-election. And oftentimes, if re-elected, like Obama served 2 consecutive terms, George Bush Jr. 2 consecutive terms, Clinton 2 consecutive terms, right? So most who serve 2 terms do it back to back. Trump, one of the few to serve a term, be out for 1 term, and then serve again, right? President liable for impeachment, trial, removal from office. So all of these things put in place, term limits, impeachment, these things are put in place to not weaken the executive, but to weaken the chance of the executive usurping power, taking too much power, right? President was also to be commander in chief of all regular United States military forces, right? but he was not to be indoctrinated or sworn in as a general, right? And you've seen some dictators do this. They're the president. They're also the general. You know, you see him with a military uniform on. I think that's done still done in some Asian countries, maybe the Middle East, yes, probably Latin America as well. President would have occasionally command a statement militias. Militias, I've heard of militias today, but I don't know if they're recognized or if they're that organized. So I don't know much about militias. President would have the power to pardon offenders. You know about that, right? Regulate foreign relations, advice and the consent of the Senate, have extensive powers. He was elected for 4 years. He could not possibly become perpetual and hereditary prince, like the despised and tyrannical King George III of Britain. So King George III he was a young whippersnapper. I think he was, let's see, I think he was like 20, 21 at the time of the revolution. When was 17? When was he born? 1738, 48, 58, 68. Yeah, so his reign was from 1760. Well, so he was in his 20s, but he wasn't 21. From 1760 to 1820. See? There you go. That's not 4 years. That's 60 years, right? So 1776, we received our independence, right? So he was 20 when he was reigned, he was 22, right? 22, 23. So he was young, he's probably in his early mid-20s when he was king while the colonies were suffering under his despot reign. Some would argue that a vigorous executive was inconsistent with Republican principles. What Republican? Don't get Republican and Democrat mixed up with parties when they're discussed here, because Republican here is about the federal and the states, right? See, I think I've done this before, have I? Definition. Belonging to a character. No, that really helps. Person advocating or supporting Republican government. Those who favor that doesn't help. Chiefly British, one of the vast favors Republican. No, I don't want Republican. Republican principles. Well, actually, it would be more like, might be easier to find it. Oh, there we go. Yeah, well, yeah, you're not advocating for Republican. What is Republican government? Any form of government which the head of state is not a hereditary monarch. Nah. But anyways, party is political party. It doesn't say. Yeah, power is given to the people. There it is. Where you have the federal and the states. But even though you have a federal, Remember, the Constitution, people are sovereign. People, get that in there. Bang it through, right? The people are sovereign, right? So they have to remain sovereign. So that concept of sovereignty is in the constant, not backup, but in the forefront of the people of the founding fathers' minds, right? Okay. Various executive was inconsistent with public principles. Okay. So people are sovereign. We need to keep the people in power. That's what I was looking for. Not the executive, right? We don't want a monarch. All men of sense agreed, said Hamilton, about the necessity of an energetic executive, right? Energetic, has energy, able to move, able to do things, enough power so that it can do things, but not too many things without authority or going through Congress, having the checks and balances of Congress and the judiciary, right? The necessary energy would come from unity, duration, adequate provision for support, and competent powers, right? First need was due dependence on the people. There it is. It's always the people, people, people. And due responsibility, right? As to unity, Hamilton argued largely to himself, because now we all argue, that executive power should be concentrated in a single chief magistrate. Sure. And not in a council or anything of that sort. History of Rome and ancient Greek republics prove this, as well as the operations under various state government. Chief magistrate, the president should bear sole responsibility for his act. There is also no need of counsel to the executive. But he does have counselors. And I think what are these one of the best digesting the most unexceptional parts of the Constitution was the provision empowering the president to make treaties, but only by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. There you go, right? So there's always these checks and balances. Checks and balances, provided 2/3 of the Senate president concur, right? This would prevent an irresponsible president, whether from ambition or avarice or other motive, from negotiating and signing the treaty without due consideration. Right. 76, with the advice and consent of the Senate, the president was to have the power to nominate, appoint ambassadors, public ministers, justice, Supreme Court, and we talked about that already, didn't we? 77, operation of the Senate is the matter of appointments would add to the stability of the administration, as the consent of the Senate would be necessary to place, as well as to appoint and change a president would not occasion so violent or so general revolution in the officers of the government. If he were the sole disposer of offices, sorry. If a man had proved his fitness in any particular high office, the new president would hesitate to displace him and bring in someone more agreeable to him, from fear of getting a rebuff in the Senate, which would bring some degree of discredit upon himself. Right? So anyways, there you go. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate, kind of go over, and I'd say half my reason for doing this was just to take a closer look at the essays themselves, right? Then we just did it with one example, so that's a minor look at the essays. But nevertheless, you get a feel for the language, right? That was Hamilton. Not everybody, not all three who wrote the essays had the same writing style or depth of vocabulary, but nevertheless, that was kind of apropos for the style of writing and the level of vocabulary and the level of metaphor. So you can see they had a lot of time, free time, right? So it seems like these many of these politicians are very well spoken. I mean, they could probably, many of them could be novelists, Benjamin Franklin for sure, because he did write. Yeah, right. He was a writer, to be honest. But that's it. So, but I will get back to you guys and look at the electoral college. I think that's big. That's a hot button issue. People talk about the electoral college, getting rid of that, and I heard that again this election. And it's always it's funny that when you win, there's no talk about by any of the winning group, no talk whatsoever about the electoral college or the Constitution needing rewriting or being problematic. Weird, isn't it? Yeah, it's just like when you see these fans and sports. I watch a lot of professional sports, football, basketball, baseball, and the losing team fans always come forth and go, "That's the refs, the umpires. They're all paid." So that's a common human failing. When you lose, you're always looking for excuses you want to point. It's the manager, it's the umpires, it's the refs, so forth. So electoral college will also get into the Declaration of Independence, and I think I'll pair that up with the letter from Birmingham jail. And take a look at how Martin Luther King used the Declaration of Independence as support for his argument. Letter from Birmingham jail is an argumentative essay and very well written. To me, I think we need to go over it. If I haven't already gone over it, maybe I've already gone over it. But I think I could do it again, probably do a better job, because I don't think I really did it the first time, and I did a very cursory method. This time I would get into the connections. I used to have it written out or have it in a book, and there's a book full of essays and letter from Birmingham jail and the Declaration of Independence, and I would have all the pages marked out and color coded. When there was a reference in the MLK essay to the Declaration of Independence, there's the red marker, and I would go to the red marker and Declaration of Independence and show the students where the Declaration of Independence would support what Martin Luther King was saying in the letter from Birmingham jail. So that's it for now. I think you've had enough. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.